Well, let's go, and others can come in as they need to.
All right, well, we're ready to start, and I hope it's recording. It didn't do anything else, so yep, I think we're recording. So, um, all right, so we'll get started here, and this is continuing our lunch series, and today's focus is on really forage testing. For lack of a better title, it's nutritional value of hay is fed to the barn. I think when we get to the end of the presentation, maybe folks will understand a little bit more about what we mean by that. And now my screen is locked up. It was moving a minute ago. There we go. All right. So first, ask the question, what is hay quality? Here's a couple of references. One was from University of New Hampshire Extension. I thought it was pretty good. I think it was the first response that popped up when I just Googled what is hay quality. Forage quality refers to a forage's potential to meet the nutritional needs of an animal. And what I thought was interesting is a hay that meets all nutritional needs of a pleasure horse would not meet those of a lactating dairy cow. The UT high quality hay production publication, there's a definition, I guess, of hay quality in there. It says it is an ultimate test of animal performance, but it's basically considered satisfactory when animals perform as on the hay that they're consuming, they perform as desired. So how does feeding poor quality hay affect mature beef cows? In a lot of different ways. The big thing that we would think of up front, losing weight, body condition, but it can reduce milk production. It can affect and will naturally affect the calves they raise, maybe calves at birth or other health problems that calves may have as they're nursing and so forth. And it can be problems in rebreeding. So keep all these things in the back of our mind as we go through here, because this is kind of the key of this thing is why is it important? Why is it important for our cattle to get the proper nutrition? Well, it's so we don't have issues with some of these things here. So when we go out and we look at a barn, and you might say, okay, here's hay. I'm probably would just guess that not all this hay came out the same field at the same time. It's probably a couple of different harvests in there. It could be one from the previous year. So, if we go out there and look at this, we don't know what the quality is. We don't know what the quality is of this hay over here on this right-hand side versus this over here. Maybe they were put in at the same time, maybe not. These bales change a little bit here and a little bit back in there. So, was this a cutting here and then this a cutting and so forth. And if we go out there, even if we forage test, we go out there and pull those, we're combining them, but there may be some differences in those two harvests. So, how do we determine hay quality? Well, it's basically by a forage test. And I have that particular tester thanks to Matt Webb. That's a great way to do it. And you can see you have a gallon size storage bag there. You just fit on that deal and you take the sample and it, you have a little old dial light rod. You can cram it down in there and it moves a lot faster than having to take that probe off all the time. But anyway, that works really good. But here's really how we take a forage test. Typically, we're going to probe 10 to 12 bales. They can be 10 or 12 small square bales or, 10 or 12 round bales. Typically, I just instruct folks to make sure that they test between the strings. Make sure your probe is going between the strings and you're getting a cross section of the hay there. We have a probe in the Giles County office to check out. Most offices do. Those of you that may be in a different county tuning into this session, county offices do have some probes that you can use. You just need a cordless drill, basically, and pretty simple process. You just go in there and probe those bales, and you need about a half a gallon bag for a good sample. Gallon storage bag, gallon freezer bag. We need a half bag to make a good sample. The Soil Plant Pest Lab website is listed here. I think I've got it at the end of the program too, but you can just Google UT Extension Soil Plant Pest Lab, and it'll come up, and then there's a forage section in there. You just go there and you can get all this information, and you can download the submission forms and so forth. The basic test costs $17. And you can, once you get that form downloaded, fill out a little bit of information, put your check in the mail, send it to the Soil Pest Lab in Nashville. They are currently running samples during this time where most county offices are shut down and we're working remote, but the soil and lab is still analyzing soil samples and forage samples, so you can get those sent off. Some things, there's a lot of information on a forage analysis, and I'm up front, I'm not a nutritionist, I'll say that, but we're going to talk a little bit about balancing rations, and from the point of just really looking at this hay and how it's stored and how it's used, and as we go through the barn. So two things we're going to consider here is crude protein, total digestible nutrients, or energy, and you'd get a lot of other information back about your hay. But the two things that right now we're going to be working with just in this example in this presentation is percent crude protein and the percent total digestible nutrients. So where all this started was I had a question from a producer locally that talked about the nutrition in hay. Said, how is this, hay cuttings affecting our cattle nutrition as we, because we're feeding this part out of the barn, and then we move to the middle of the barn and the back of the barn and so forth. And so we tested his hay, and then got some other farms tested and started trying to look at that. And we actually found that if you're not careful when you're forage testing, you could end up with a roller coaster there. If you're saying, well, I'm going to forage test, and you do one sample for the whole barn, that's not really good. I'm going to say okay, but it's really not, because we don't, one sample of one hay harvest may have been better quality than the other, and you're mixing all that, and you're getting an average. It may be average, but it's not going to work as you're feeding the good hay. Then you move into the poor hay. You got to think about what's it doing to those cows and those calves, and so he asked the question. We went out and looked, and so we're going to show you a bunch of data from that. So what we did, we pulled 14 samples from 4 different farms, and the UT lab did analyze these, and then we came back and balanced the ration for each of the hay, and really I balanced it on with crude protein. So here was farm A, and you can kind of get an idea of how good this hay is if you watch these samples, and every one of them is different. But what we did, again, we're looking for them, if you go top to bottom, the third cutting here in this particular farm was tarped out outside the barn, would be the first hay they'd be using. Then in the front of the barn, the next hay would be right at the front of the barn. It was a first cutting in 2019, and they actually had some hay in the back that was a first cutting back in 2018. So if they were feeding through the barn, if you look from top to bottom, that's what we're talking about here. So you'd start out with the tarped hay out front, and really there's not a lot of difference in these samples. This is more uniform samples, which is sort of interesting because you got hay coming from 2 different years and cuttings that even in 2019 that were probably pulled several weeks apart. But anyway, crude protein, not a lot of difference, a little bit of difference in the energy or TDN, but fairly consistent on these samples. Farm B here, if you'll notice, these were all the way through the barn. Front of the barn, pretty good hay, 57+% TDN, real good protein. And then that winter annual on the backside, we might, the small grain, wheat hay, whatever, you might expect that to be put up pretty good quality, and it was. But look at the hay in the middle, which is sort of interesting because I balanced these based on crude protein, and I just picked that, went through it. But actually, the sample in the middle of the barn has plenty of energy, but it's the protein that's lacking. It's a pretty, it's a decent sample, but still we're going to see that it's going to need some supplementation. But the point here that you can see is how if you're feeding the front of the barn and all of a sudden you transition into that hay in the middle of the barn, if we don't do anything supplementation, we can see where we start getting into some issues. Farm C kind of is on the other spectrum of things. As you look, some really, really low quality hay here. And you know, the TDN is really low, especially on that last sample down there, but look at the protein really low. These hays are going to have to be supplemented, but it's not all going to be supplemented the same, and you'll see that when we get into looking at the rations kind of. But you know, the point here is these hays are going to be supplemented, but again, if we're not supplementing, we're going back to that early slide about cows are going to lose body condition. It could be affecting the calves, they're nursing, and all those factors. The fourth farm here that we did is several cuttings. This one is real interesting because you've got some really good hay. You know, if you were looking here and you were feeding from top to bottom, this is the way you access your hay. Then looking at the first okay, can everybody hear me now? I think I lost you for a second. Deal, can somebody let me know if we're okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. Got to get this message. I apologize for y'all. We got real bad internet reception today. So if this happens again, hopefully it'll get me back on. So I think we were talking about all these samples on this particular cutting, but notice how all of these are moving. You know, you've got a really good sample here on the first cutting, first bay, and then you go to a really poor sample. So, you know, the thought here is that, okay, well, if I don't know what these nutritional analysis of the hay is, look at what could really be happening between that first cutting there that you're setting out, and once all that's gone, you move to that second cutting and that second bay, and all of a sudden you can see how that could really be
Kevin.
that disaster. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but I don't see
Share your screen again, please. Yes.
Okay. Do
Share
that.
your screen.
Share my screen. Here we go. How about that?
Yeah, that's it.
All right, very good. Apologize again for all this craziness, but so you can see kind of what we're talking about there, the how that protein and energy, you see how they change going back and forth. And again, you get this roller coaster effect, as the producer was saying, hey, you know, that could be a real issue. So let's see if I can change. Well, I'm having trouble moving advancing my slide now. Hang on, it moved again in a minute. Can y'all still see the Farm D sample?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see if I can. Well, there we go. There we go. Okay. Takes a minute to wake it up, I guess. All right, now, so what we did was we selected a cow. This is a 1,200-pound cow, average milk and beef cow, nursing a calf. These are her nutritional needs. And what we did was we were going to go through each of these forage samples and analyze the sample based on this particular cow's need. We just picked a cow 1,200 pounds, probably a pretty average cow for most of our farms out there. So beef farms. So you know, you're looking at the numbers here. These are the key numbers. She has to have. She can take in 23 pounds of dry matter. It's about what she's going to consume a day. And out of that, we've got to get these numbers up: 9.3% protein, 55.5% TDN. So thanks to Mr. Matt, he sent me a ration balancing program that maybe he can give him credit for developing or working on or whatever, but it was helpful. And again, you know, I mentioned I am not a nutritionist, but for the sake of this presentation, we balanced this ration on the crude protein of the hay. And you can see right here, here was this sample, crude protein about 8.66%. So we come down here and that's our forage mixture using this square approach. The feed mixture, I just picked corn and soybean meal. There's a bunch of other things you can do, but those are just basic feed commodities that's available. So just some corn and soybean meal, and basically use these mixtures to balance all of this hay. So you kind of plug it into the system here. Here's your cow needs. So basically what we come up with is a ratio of about almost 88% of the diet in the hay and 12% in this mix of feed here. And you can see what we're trying to do is get to this 23 pounds basically of dry matter. So again, you know, we're just using this information to kind of dictate or demonstrate really, you know, what this hay does to these cows as they're consuming that. So when we go back in and look at all of the farms, I put the cows information at the bottom of each of these charts and went through here and said, okay, here's where you know, how much hay they would need to consume based on this particular sample, and then what the supplementation is. And the reason this one's in red is because it was the sample that I just showed in the previous slide. But anyhow, you'll notice there are some differences, not a lot in this particular sample, but again, you know, there's going to be some changes depending on, you know, when you move from feeding one hay or you run out of that third cutting that's tarped and you start moving into the front of the barn, there's going to be some differences in them. Not as much on this farm as it is on some of these others. This was the one that was the real interesting deal because we went from a really good hay, high in energy and protein that met the nutritional needs of a 1,200 pound cow, to the middle of the barn, which is the hay we would get to next, and notice we needed supplementation. And so this is where the producer said, hey, we're on this roller coaster right up here. We're doing pretty good. All of a sudden we get down in this valley and there's a need for this. Again, if we're just allowing them to eat 23 pounds of hay, they are not getting the nutritional needs, therefore losing weight, body condition, so forth. Here's Farm C, and these were the hays that were really low quality, and you can see the supplementation needs here. Almost 5 pounds of corn, quite a bit of soybean meal, just to come close to balancing those rations. Not near as much of that hay because it's not as good a quality. But even in this scenario, you've got, you know, you still need quite a bit of supplementation, and then it's going to slack up as you get to the next cutting, and then, you know, when you're finally getting to the end of the barn, you're back to that needing quite a bit of supplementation. These, again, an interesting one because the very first sample, you know, we don't need any supplementation. The hay takes care of itself. But when we go to this second, if this was the next hay that we were getting to in the barn to use, we're going from not eating anything to needing about as much supplementation we do on any of the samples in this demonstration. So again, you can see how these numbers are moving and changing. Here's actually the one down here that's pretty good on protein, but we need the energy. So we would need more corn maybe and not as much in the way of soybean meal. But basically, though, again, you can just see how these are changing. So if we look at these, 3 out of these 14 harvests basically will balance a ration. That is only 21%. Now, if you put that on a county level, when you think about all the hay that's put up and every farm putting up 2 or 3 maybe harvests a year, and you applied that number, you know, it looks like there'd be a lot of cows having some issues out there. I think this is a point to say, hey, you know, we really need to be forage testing our hay, because if we're starting to run into some issues there, say with body condition, whatnot, we got to look at our hay and what's happening here. But you know, 3 of these 14 samples will work with not any supplementation, but the rest of them need it. So it kind of tells me there's probably a lot of hay being cut that needs supplementation. And just to kind of put a little bit of the cost information, you can see here we go through, here's what the hay, pounds of hay that we're going to consume, the corn, the soybean meal, and then you get out here in individual costs. And these are, I just called the Giles County Co-op, got these numbers. When I put this together, I think we used this in a master beef class earlier this year, last fall. But anyway, you just pull those numbers in at the time, and that's kind of where these numbers come up. But if you want to look at a summary here, basically, some of these cows, when we're feeding certain cuttings of hay here, we're looking at anywhere from 50 to 78 cents a cow per day. We need to, it's going to cost us supplementation if we're doing this and basing this on what the cow needs. So there's some additional cost to get this cow the nutrition it needs. So another thing to consider is not only is it the cows, the need and what's happening with their health, and you've got some additional cost going on there. So you might say, well, how do you get this maturity? I mean, rather this hay quality that we're looking for, and it basically is based on maturity of when we want to harvest our hay. And this is actually nearly a 20-year-old study I did with a producer, but it really says a whole lot. If you look here, what he did was he cut hay, and every time he did, I went out and sampled it. And the first one, I think he actually already had these in the barn. These were square bales, small square bales. This is all just basically grass hay. It was, it could have been I think a fescue orchard grass mix, but it was basic grass hay. And notice the protein and TDN about as good as you're going to find on some of these fescue samples here. Probably don't see that good very often, but it is there. it can, and it can perform that well. But again, this Dave's May the 5th, I think. So this cutting would have happened, 10, 12 days ago. In today's, if we're looking at today's scenario, but some pretty good quality stuff. Even the May 3rd cutting, but you can see a trend here as the grass got mature and started seeding out. Our fiber was increasing, but the quality was decreasing. You'll just notice these numbers all going down. Now, this was the year of the true armyworm. Some of you might remember that. This particular field was all stems. I remember we took a lot of pictures and documented that. There were samples that ran through the lab that year that was down about 3 or 4% protein. So, it just happened that armyworms happened to hit some of these fields. You'll notice this field wasn't really affected. Another one was. So that's kind of how they hit, but it kind of shows you what they did to some of the quality. Now, this June the 9th cutting is real interesting because I think this was one he did with somebody with shares maybe or something, but this was actually the first cutting, and you look what has happened to the quality. Now, these first 2 or 3 cuttings, basically they're going to balance a ration for most anything we're feeding to. I'm going to say this cutting down here is going to have to be supplemented to just about everything we're feeding to. But it does demonstrate how that quality, declines over time. Now, one thing about this cutting here is going to have more yield. There's no doubt about it, because as this plant matures, it's putting on more fiber. We're going to get a higher yield, and you can win that argument all the time when you start quality versus yield. But the thing that I would point out here is that these are second cuttings to some of these first ones. And if you look at June the 22nd, which is just about a week and a half later or so, he went back in and did the April 25th cutting and still had pretty good quality. That tells us that it's all about the stage of maturity of that grass. And by going in here and getting this quality, I would dare say that he probably had more yield when you added the April 25th and the June 22nd. Both of those harvests together probably out yielded this cutting, but it certainly did by quality. What's even more interesting, I think, is if you look at July 13th, really hot time of the year to put up hay, he went back and cut half of this field from May the 13th. Well, here was your May the 13th, the first cutting. Here was the protein and the TDN. Notice what happened on July the 13th. The crude protein went up about 1.5%, and the energy, TDN, about 5% in that cutting. So it was all about the maturity of the grass and when you're able to get to it. and that has a major effect on the quality of this hay. If you took the cow that we used in our example and we just ran her back through here, looking at these hays, well, all these in yellow would easily meet her nutritional needs. This May 13th cutting would almost there with protein and a little under on energy. So we'd have to do a little supplementation. These two are going to take quite a bit more supplementation. Again, the point here is that as your hay matures, it's going to go down in quality, and that means you're going to need to provide some kind of feed supplementation if you're going to keep your cows in the body condition that you want them in. You know, we kind of talk about some of the holidays on cutting hay, and a lot of folks think, well, you know, Memorial Day, there's a lot of hay put up around Memorial Day or 4th of July or Labor Day. That's not the time to necessarily be putting up hay. It's now. I saw a field. We got a field down close where I live. There's already been a couple guys putting up hay already this year, and it's probably going to be pretty good quality. So the earlier we get to it, the better chance of that quality being much better. So this is just kind of a pulled from the I think it's a high quality hay publication that you can find on our website. But as grasses and legumes advance from the vegetative to the reproductive stage, they become higher in fiber, which means we do increase the yield. It's lowering the protein digestibility and palatability. So the quality will deteriorate as the forage matures. So what we're looking for on this hay is we really want to get hay cut when we get into the early seed head emergence. So you go out, and call that the boot stage, where you see that head beginning to emerge. And you know, on the fescue, if you think about it, you know, the seed head will extend, and then those seeds will begin to open up. And as all that happens, that plant is beginning to increase in fiber and reduce in quality, or being reduced in quality. So that's the key, I think, to getting this hay put up right, is to go out and look at the maturity of your grass and try to base when you can get to it on that. Weather always is going to be a factor. There's just no, I mean, sometimes, you know, your best intentions are not going to be good enough. And we understand that's a lot easier for me to sit here and say, hey, this is when you need to do it. When reality is sometimes weather becomes a factor. Some of the guys rolling some of the higher moisture hay, you know, they're taking the weather out. So they're able to do a little bit better job of getting the quality in that hay. So just a couple things on the take-home message. We want to certainly strive to harvest hay at the highest quality. We need to forage test each individual hay harvest. That's the point of this study, was that, so, you know, it's great if we got folks hay forage testing their hay, but if they're not going in and looking at each individual hay harvest, then they're probably not helping themselves any. We need to balance a ration based on the forage test to reduce these nutritional deficiencies. Again, work with a nutritionist, somebody can help balance a ration. And again, if you don't know the nutritional value of your hay, then your cattle nutrition could be on a roller coaster during the winter. You know, and as we demonstrated through the barns there, there was a lot of change in that quality as we went through the barn. So I tried to move on through that so we didn't have another disruption. There's my contact information, and if you got any questions out there, I can try to answer them. I know some of my colleagues are on here, and they probably can help answer as well. Anything out there, anything in the chat, guys?
Nothing in the chat yet.
All right, then, if that's no questions, I think we've got this recorded. We'll try to get it posted and for future reference, but